At 0715 hours on June 15, 1944, a German 105mm howitzer battery from the 716th Static Infantry Division opened fire on British positions, advancing from Sword Beach near Caen, France. The battery had been in position since dawn. Standard doctrine called for firing 3 to 5 rounds, then immediately relocating before Allied artillery spotters could pinpoint the position. The battery commander gave the order to fire. The gun crews loaded, aimed, and fired 3 rounds each. 12 shells total arced toward the British lines 3,000 m away. The battery commander called out the order to cease fire and prepare to displace. The crews began their rehearsed drill. Unhook the trail spades, secure the ammunition, connect the prime movers. Then the American shells arrived. The sound came first, like tearing fabric magnified 1,000 times. The shells came from multiple directions simultaneously. Not a creeping barrage where rounds walked across the landscape. Not a sequential bombardment where batteries fired and turned. Every shell landed within 3 seconds of each other. Time on target. The first salvo destroyed 2 howitzers. The second salvo killed the battery commander and 7 crew members. The third salvo destroyed the ammunition stocks. The battery ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Elapsed time from the last German round fired to the first American shells landing was less than 5 minutes. This pattern repeated itself across Normandy throughout June and July 1944. German artillery batteries that had operated effectively in Poland, France, and Russia found themselves unable to survive in Normandy. The Americans had developed a counter-battery system that located German guns and delivered mass fires faster than German doctrine said was possible. The problem was not new. Artillery had killed more soldiers than any other weapon since the American Civil War. Finding and destroying enemy artillery batteries, called counter-fire, had been the goal of every army for decades. But actually doing it effectively required solving 3 problems that no army had fully answered until 1944. First, you had to locate the enemy guns. Artillery hid behind hills, in forests, in defade positions where direct observation was impossible. Spotting them required technical methods developed in World War I. Sound ranging used microphones to triangulate gun positions by detecting muzzle blasts. Flash spotting used surveyed observation posts to plot bearing lines to muzzle flashes. Aerial reconnaissance used spotter planes to observe from above. All these methods worked, but slowly. Locating a battery typically required 15 to 30 minutes. By then, if the enemy followed proper displacement procedures, they had moved. Second, you had to calculate firing data for your own guns. Range, azimuth, elevation, propellant charge, all adjusted for wind, temperature, barrel wear, altitude, and propellant temperature. Each gun required separate calculations. Even with trained crews, processing a fire mission for a single battery required 5 to 8 minutes using traditional methods. Third, you had to coordinate multiple batteries. Massing fire from dozens of guns onto a single target required careful planning. Traditional methods required units to have identical maps, survey data to precisely locate each batter position, and forward observers with direct communication to every battery. Each battery independently calculated its firing solution, then fired when ready. The entire process, from target identification to shells on target, typically required 30 to 40 minutes for a multi-ATTR strike. 30 to 40 minutes gave the enemy time to displace. German doctrine emphasized shoot-and-scoot tactics developed on the Eastern Front. Fire a few rounds, move to an alternate position, fire again. Mobility defeated counter-battery fire. If you kept moving, the enemy shells always arrived at an empty field. The Americans changed everything. By June 1944, American artillery could deliver mass counter-batter fire within 6 to 9 minutes of target identification, sometimes faster. From the moment a German gun fired to the moment American shells landed on that position, less time elapsed than it took to hook a howitzer to a prime mover. The innovation that made this possible had started not in combat, but in a classroom at an artillery school in Oklahoma 15 years earlier. In 1930, the United States Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma faced a doctrinal problem. Artillery doctrine called for massing fires from multiple batteries onto single targets. This was standard practice developed in World War I, used by every major army. The problem was that existing methods were slow and complicated. Traditional massing fire required extensive coordination. Each battery needed identical maps. Each battery needed precise survey data showing their exact position. Each battery needed a forward observer with direct communication. When a fire mission came in, each battery independently calculated firing data, then fired when ready. Shells arrived on target over a span of several minutes, giving the enemy time to take cover. Major Carlos Brewer, director of the gunnery department at Fort Sill, understood these limitations. Brewer was a professional artillery officer who had served in World War I. 3. He recognized that future warfare would require faster, more flexible artillery support. Brewer and his instructors developed a revolutionary concept they called the Fire Direction Center. Instead of having each battery calculate firing data independently, centralize the calculations at battalion or higher level, create a dedicated team of specialists with detailed firing charts, pre-computed data, and direct communication with all subordinate batteries. When a fire mission came in, the Fire Direction Center calculated firing data for every battery simultaneously and transmitted firing commands to all guns at once. In the spring of 1931, the Fort Sill Gunnery Department demonstrated massing battalion fire using this new method. They coordinated 24 guns from 3 batteries to fire simultaneously on a single target. The demonstration succeeded. The Army adopted the Fire Direction Center concept as standard doctrine, but doctrine on paper differed from implementation in combat. Making fire direction centers work required trained personnel, proper equipment, and most importantly, a system of pre-computed firing data that eliminated time-consuming calculations in the field. The Americans developed what they called graphical firing tables. Artillery officers at Fort Sill created specialized chartboards with pre-computed firing data for every possible combination of range, elevation, propellant temperature, air density, and wind conditions. When a fire mission came in, the Fire Direction Center laid a calibrated ruler between the battery position and the target position on the map, read the firing data directly from the chart, and transmitted it to the guns. No calculation required. The entire process took 2 to 3 minutes. Other armies used firing tables, too, but American tables were more comprehensive and faster to use. British tables required mental arithmetic. German tables required logarithmic calculations. Soviet tables required referencing multiple charts. The American graphical method was faster than all of them. The second innovation was communications. Fire direction centers needed reliable communication with forward observers and firing batteries. The United States Army invested heavily in radio equipment designed specifically for artillery fire control. By 1941, every American artillery battalion had multiple radio nets linking observers, fire direction centers, and gun batteries. The third innovation was training. Operating a fire direction center required specialists who could read maps, use graphical firing tables, and coordinate multiple batteries under stress. The Army created dedicated training schools for Fire Direction Center personnel. By 1943, every artillery officer and many enlisted specialists had received Fire Direction Center training. The fourth innovation, the one that most terrorized German artillery crews, was called time on target. The British Army had pioneered this technique during the North African Campaign in late 1941 and early 1942 using BBC radio time signals for synchronization. The Americans developed similar capabilities independently through their Fire Direction Center system. Time on target meant firing multiple batteries, so all shells landed on target simultaneously. The Fire Direction Center calculated not just range and azimuth for each battery, but also time of flight for each battery's shells to reach the target. Then the center broadcast a countdown. Each battery fired at the precise moment that would cause their shells to arrive at the target at the same time as shells from every other battery. The result was devastating. Instead of shells arriving over several minutes, giving the enemy time to take cover, all shells from dozens of guns exploded within a 3-second window. The enemy received no warning. One moment there was silence. The next moment, a hurricane of steel. The Americans first employed time on target in combat at Guadalcanal in 1943 under General J. Iton Collins. By Normandy, American forces had refined the technique into a system unmatched by any other army. An American infantry company under fire could call for artillery support and have multiple battalions, potentially dozens of guns from across an entire corps sector, firing time on target missions within 9 minutes. 9 minutes from initial radio call to shells impacting simultaneously on target. This was not theory. This was standard performance repeatedly documented in combat. But fire direction centers in time. On target only solved half the counterbed Americans to mass fire quickly once a target was identified. they did not solve the harder problem of finding enemy artillery positions in the first place. That required technical target acquisition methods developed in World War I and refined over 25 years. Sound ranging, flash spotting, aerial observation, and by 1944, radar. Sound ranging located guns by detecting sound waves from firing and using multiple microphones to calculate gun position through triangulation. The British had pioneered the technique in World War I. By World War II, American sound ranging units used electronic equipment that could plot firing positions on a map within 3 to 5 minutes of detecting gunfire. Flash spotting located guns by observing muzzle flash through surveyed observation posts at different locations. Multiple observers reported bearing to the flash. The fire direction center plotted where bearing lines intersected. Flash spotting worked best at night, but could be effective in daylight with clear sight lines. Aerial observation used small spotter planes, usually Piper Cub L-4 aircraft, flying over the battlefield with an artillery officer as observer. The observer could see enemy guns firing, mark positions on maps, and radio coordinates directly to fire direction centers. The small planes flew low and slow, making them vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, but American P-47 fighter bomber patrols generally kept German anti-aircraft guns suppressed. The most advanced method, available in limited numbers by mid-1944, was counterbar. The SCR-584 radar could track artillery shells in flight and calculate trajectory backwards to determine gun location. Radar worked day or night and could not be fooled by camouflage. When radar detected a German shell, it provided gun location to fire direction centers within 90 seconds. Each method had limitations. Sound ranging required suitable terrain and specific weather conditions. Flash spotting required clear sight lines. Aerial observation required air superiority. Radar had limited range, but used together, the methods provided redundant coverage. iPhone method failed, another succeeded, and all methods fed targeting data to the same fire direction centers that could turn that data into mass artillery fire within minutes. The Germans had similar target acquisition equipment. German sound ranging units were competent. German aerial observers were skilled when they could get aircraft airborne, but Germans lacked the integrated system that connected target acquisition to rapid mass fires. A German sound ranging unit might locate an American battery in 15 minutes, but coordinating a multi-battalion counter-battery strike took another 30 to 40 minutes. By then, the target had moved. The Americans integrated everything. Target acquisition units had direct communication with corps and division fire direction centers. When a target was identified, it entered the system immediately. The fire direction center assigned available batteries, calculated firing data, and had shells on target within minutes of target acquisition. One American pilot flying over the Italian front in 1944 called in 5 separate corps-level fire missions in a single hour. 5 different targets, each engaged by artillery from multiple divisions, all coordinated through fire direction centers that processed missions in minutes. That level of responsiveness was unmatched by any other army. In Normandy, Americans had another advantage. The terrain was relatively compact, the front line relatively concentrated, and American artillery was abundant. A typical American corps in Normandy had 8 to 12 artillery battalions under corps control beyond battalions assigned to divisions. All those battalions could range anywhere along the corps front. All could be masked against any target within minutes. German forces in Normandy first encountered the system on D-Day itself. The 716th Static Infantry Division defended the Caen sector, including Sword, Juno, Gold, and portions of Omaha Beach. The division had been weakened by transfers to the Eastern Front. At 7,000 troops, significantly under strength, many soldiers were Ole Gen, Eastern volunteers, and conscripts from Soviet territories. On June 6, the division's artillery elements attempt to provide fire support to beach defenses. American and British naval gunfire responded with overwhelming force. When German batteries attempted to engage from inland positions, American artillery spotters and Piper Cubs identified firing positions within minutes. Counterfire followed shortly after. One German gun position at resistance point 62 manned by personnel from both the 716th Static Infantry Division and the 352nd Infantry Division. Coordinated artillery fire for howitzer batteries located 5 kilometers inland at Huddville. American destroyer gunfire and counter-battery strikes systematically suppressed these positions throughout the day. The 352nd Infantry Division, holding defensive positions near St. Lo and Carentan, had been brought into Normandy by Rommel in March 1944 at full strength, approximately 12,000 men. The division's artillery regiment faced the full weight of American counter capabilities from the first day of the invasion. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B, had recognized before the invasion that Allied material superiority would be decisive. In situation reports to Commander-in-Chief West during early July 1944, Rommel explicitly noted the enemy's enormous use of material, above all, artillery and tanks. His reports to headquarters outlined why Allied breakthrough was inevitable, citing enemy superiority in material, supply, and air power combined with high German casualty figures. Rommel understood that German artillery could not operate effectively under constant observation from Allied aircraft and rapid counter-response. In interrogations after the war, German commanders consistently identified American artillery superiority as one of the most critical factors in Normandy. The 3rd Parachute Division arrived in Normandy from Brittany on June 10, 1944 at full strength of approximately 15,976 soldiers. The division was deployed to hold the American left flank near the Vire River. Within weeks, the division's artillery had suffered devastating losses from American counter-fire. While specific daily casualty figures are not documented in available records, the division's after-action reports noted that American counter-fire was arriving so rapidly that standard displacement procedures were ineffective. During the battle for Hill 192, outside Street Low in July 1944, American artillery demonstrated the full capability of the Fire Direction Center system. The 2nd Infantry Division alone fired up to 20 times on target missions per night to keep defenders off balance. German prisoners of war consistently remarked during interrogations about the heavy volume of American fire they had experienced. On June 29, 1944, British forces launched Operation Epsom, an offensive to outflank Caen from the west. German High Command ordered a counterattack. The 1st SS Panzer Division Liebstander Adolf Hitler recently arrived from the Eastern Front, assembled for a counterattack toward Borgebos Ridge. The 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions were engaged west of the Oron River, tied down by British diversionary operations, specifically designed to prevent these formations from opposing the main attack. American and British artillery coordinated through integrated fire direction centers hammered German assembly areas continuously. The counterattack got off to a delayed start and was disrupted repeatedly by artillery fire working in conjunction with RAF Hawker Typhoon rocket attacks. The operation achieved limited gains before being called off within 24 hours. This pattern repeated throughout the Normandy campaign. German commanders who attempted to mass forces for counterattacks found their assembly areas under devastating artillery fire before attacks could begin. Field Marshal Ger von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, requested massive reinforcements of artillery and counter-bassets. The reinforcements never arrived. By late July 1944, during the American breakout from Normandy, German artillery opposition was described in American after-action reports as light to negligible. The Germans still had guns, but they could not use them without being destroyed by American counter-battery fire within minutes. General Feld Marshal Gerhard von Rundstedt, in assessments of Allied naval gunfire support during the Cherbourg operations, described it as flexible and well-directed in support of land troops, ranging from battleship to gunboat, functioning as quickly mobile, constantly available artillery. German reports from the Military Journal noted that Allied naval fire curtains were among their trump cards, more accurate in crisis situations, and sustainable on target, fulfilling the role of floating artillery. Japanese forces on Okinawa in April 1945 faced the same American counter-batter system. The Japanese had studied German reports from Normandy and adopted extreme shoot and scoot tactics. Japanese batteries fired 2 or 3 rounds, then immediately abandoned positions and moved to underground tunnels and caves. Guns were sometimes left in place as decoys. The Japanese knew American counter-battery fire would arrive within minutes, so they ensured nobody was present when shells landed. American sound-ranging units on Okinawa located Japanese gun positions within 5 minutes of firing. American counter-batter fire landed on target within 9 minutes of initial detection. But when American troops assaulted the positions, they found abandoned guns and empty bunkers. The Americans adapted by using counter-battery fire not to destroy guns, but to suppress them. If a Japanese battery fired, American artillery pounded the position for 30 minutes, ensuring gun crews could not return to service the weapon. Then American infantry and armor advanced while enemy artillery was suppressed. During the Okinawa campaign, American artillery fired over 3 million rounds in 82 days of fighting. That averaged 36,000 rounds per day, more ammunition than some European nations fired in the entire war. Japanese artillery officers captured on Okinawa consistently reported that American countered fire was the most effective they had encountered, faster and more accurate than anything they had expected. The Japanese never solved the American counter. They adapted tactics to survive it, but could not suppress it or counter it effectively. By the end of World War II, American artillery had become the single most effective arm of United States ground forces. General George Patton, who commanded the Third Army through campaigns in France and Germany, stated that the war was largely won by artillery. Patton, an armor officer by background, gave that credit because he understood what artillery had accomplished. The Fire Direction Center system developed at Fort Sill in the 1930s became the standard for modern artillery operations worldwide. Every modern army today uses some form of fire direction center. The concept of centralizing fire control using pre-computed data and amassing fires from multiple units through coordinated communications is now universal. Time on target remains a standard artillery technique taught in every artillery school used by every modern military. The ability to coordinate fires so all rounds impact simultaneously is now considered basic artillery doctrine. Counter-battery operations today use many of the same principles developed in World War II. Modern armies use radar, acoustic sensors, and aerial reconnaissance to locate enemy artillery exactly as American forces did in 1944. The technology is more advanced. The computers are faster. But the fundamental concept of rapidly locating enemy artillery and destroying it before it can displace remains unchanged. The men who made the system work were not famous. Major Carlos Brewer, who helped develop the Fire Direction Center concept at Fort Sill, is not a household name. The artillery officers and enlisted specialists who operated fire direction centers in Normandy, calculating firing data and coordinating dozens of batteries under fire, received no special recognition. The aerial observers who flew Piper Cubs over German positions, often drawing anti-aircraft fire to spot enemy guns, were mentioned in few histories. But their work was decisive. German artillery officers who survived the war consistently identified American artillery as the most effective weapon they faced. General Hansa Burbach, commander of 5th Panzer Army in Normandy, noted in interrogations that American artillery superiority was overwhelming. German reports consistently emphasized that American forces could bring down fire on any German position within minutes and that German counter-efforts were ineffective because American guns displaced too quickly and were too numerous to suppress. The 28th Field Artillery Battalion, assigned to the 8th Infantry Division, fired over 40,000 rounds during the Normandy campaign. The battalion's fire direction center coordinated hundreds of fire missions. The names of individual specialists who calculated firing data for specific missions are not recorded in most archives. That is how most history works. The critical innovations that change warfare are often invisible to those experiencing combat. German artillery, which had been a feared and effective weapon for decades, found itself outmatched by an opponent that could locate, target, and destroy artillery positions faster than doctrine said was possible. American forces advanced with artillery support that was responsive, accurate, and overwhelming. By late July 1944, German commanders in Normandy consistently reported that American artillery superiority was one of the decisive factors preventing successful defense or counterattack. Innovations developed by artillery officers in Oklahoma in 1931, refined through years of training and doctrine development, implemented by thousands of soldier and fire direction centers across every American artillery unit, proved decisive in the largest military campaign in American history. The system worked not because of individual genius, but because of systematic integration of technology, doctrine, training, and communications into a coordinated whole that no other army could match. This channel shares forgotten stories from World War II. Stories of innovation and sacrifice that shape the world we live in today. If you found this valuable, consider liking this video to help others discover these histories. Subscribe to see more accounts of the innovations that decided the war. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Thank you for watching and thank you for keeping history alive.